Hello, hello. What's up, everyone? Cooter Brown here. See if I can bring myself up here. Oh, there we go. So, anyways, I was gonna do this at 4:30. Decide to delay it. Then I, for some reason, decide coming out. But, anyways, I know there's a lot of correlation. Domestic violence against women and some men too. But I wanted to try to have a conversation or study it a little bit more on why this happens. And what I'm basically understanding after kind of looking into it is dysfunction in families and how the dysfunction in family leads to abuse in our mental health and everything. So, first off, I want to share one movie here with you guys, let you listen to it, and then maybe talk and see what you guys think. But let me play it here. Just one sec.
About a disturbing question, which has an equally disturbing answer. My topic is the secrets of domestic violence. And the question I'm going to tackle is the one question everyone always asks. Why does she stay? Why would anyone stay with a man who beats her? I'm not a psychiatrist, a social worker, or an expert in domestic violence. I'm just one woman with a story to tell. I was 22. I had just graduated from Harvard College. I'd moved to New York City for my first job as a writer and editor at 17 magazine. I had my first apartment, my first little green American Express card, and I had a very big secret. My secret was that I had this gun loaded with hollow point bullets pointed at my head by the man who I thought was my soulmate many, many times. The man who I loved more than anybody on earth held a gun to my head and threatened to kill me more times than I can even remember. I'm here to tell you the story of crazy love, a psychological trap disguised as love, one that millions of women and even a few men fall into every year. It may even be your story. I don't look like a typical domestic violence survivor. I have a BA in English from Harvard College, an MBA in marketing from Wharton Business School. I spent most of my career working for Fortune 500 companies, including Johnson & Johnson, Leo Burnett, and the Washington Post. I've been married for almost 20 years to my second husband, and we have 3 kids together. My dog is a black lab, and I drive a Honda Odyssey minivan. So my first message for you is that domestic violence happens to everyone. All races, all religions, all income and education levels. It's everywhere. And my second message is that everyone thinks domestic violence happens to women, that it's a women's issue. Not exactly. Over 85% of abusers are men. And domestic abuse happens only in intimate, interdependent, long-term relationships. In other words, in families. The last place we would want or expect to find violence, which is one reason domestic abuse is so confusing. I would have told you myself that I was the last person on earth who would stay with a man who beats me. But in fact, I was a very typical victim because of my age. I was 22. And in the United States, women ages 16 to 24 are 3 times as likely to be domestic violence victims as women of other ages. And over 500 women and girls this age are killed every year by abusive partners, boyfriends and husbands in the United States. I was also a very typical victim because I knew nothing about domestic violence, its warning signs or its patterns. I met Connor on a cold, rainy January night. He sat next to me on the New York City subway, and he started chatting me up. He told me 2 things. One was that he too had just graduated from an Ivy League school, and that he worked at a very impressive Wall Street bank. But what made the biggest impression on me that first meeting was that he was smart and funny. And he looked like a farm boy. He had these big cheeks, these big apple cheeks, and this wheat blonde hair, and he seemed so sweet. One of the smartest things Connor did from the very beginning was to create the illusion that I was the dominant partner in the relationship. He did this, especially at the beginning, by idolizing me. We started dating, and he loved everything about me. That I was smart, that I'd gone to Harvard, that I was passionate about helping teenage girls and my job. He wanted to know everything about my family and my childhood, my hopes and dreams. Connor believed in me as a writer and a woman in a way that no one else ever had. And he also created a magical atmosphere of trust between us by confessing his secret, which was that as a very young boy, starting at age 4, he had been savagely and repeatedly physically abused by his stepfather. And the abuse had gotten so bad that he had had to drop out of school in 8th grade, even though he was very smart. And he'd spent almost 20 years rebuilding his life, which is why that Ivy League degree and the Wall Street job and his bright, shiny future meant so much to him. If you had told me that this smart, funny, sensitive man who adored me would one day dictate whether or not I wore makeup, how short my skirts were, where I lived, what jobs I took, who my friends were, and where I spent Christmas, I would have laughed at you. Because there was not a hint of violence or control or anger in Connor at the beginning. I didn't know that the first stage in any domestic violence relationship is to seduce and charm the victim. I also didn't know that the second step is to isolate the victim. Now, Connor did not come home one day and announce, hey, all this Romeo and Juliet stuff has been great, but I need to move into the next phase where I isolate you and I abuse you. So I need to get you out of this apartment where the neighbors can hear you scream and out of this city where you have friends and family and coworkers who can see the bruises. Instead, Connor came home one Friday evening and he told me that he had quit his job that day, his dream job. And he said that he had quit his job because of me, because I had made him feel so safe and loved that he didn't need to prove himself on Wall Street anymore. And he just wanted to get out of the city and away from his abusive, dysfunctional family and move to a tiny town in New England where he could start his life over with me by his side. Now, the last thing I wanted to do was leave New York and my dream job. But I thought you made sacrifices for your soulmate. So I agreed, and I quit my job, and Connor and I left Manhattan together. I had no idea I was falling into crazy love, that I was walking headfirst into a carefully laid physical, financial, and psychological trap. The next step in the domestic violence pattern is to introduce the threat of violence and see how she reacts. And here's where those guns come in. As soon as we moved to New England, that place where Connor was supposed to feel so safe, he bought 3 guns. He kept one in the glove compartment of our car. He kept one under the pillows on our bed. And the third one he kept in his pocket at all times. And he said that he needed those guns because of the trauma he'd experienced as a young boy. He needed them to feel protected. But those guns were really a message for me. And even though he hadn't raised a hand to me, my life was already in grave danger every minute of every day. Connor first physically attacked me 5 days before our wedding. It was 7 a.m. I still had on my nightgown. I was working on my computer trying to finish a freelance writing assignment, and I got frustrated. And Connor used my anger as an excuse to put both of his hands around my neck and to squeeze so tightly that I could not breathe or scream. And he used the chokehold to hit my head repeatedly against the wall. 5 days later, the 10 bruises on my neck had just faded, and I put on my mother's wedding dress, and I married him. Despite what had happened, I was sure we were going to live happily ever after because I loved him and he loved me so much. And he was very, very sorry. He had just been really stressed out by the wedding and by becoming a family with me. It was an isolated incident and he was never going to hurt me again. It happened twice more on the honeymoon. The first time, I was driving to find a secret beach, and I got lost. And he punched me in the side of my head so hard that the other side of my head repeatedly hit the driver's side window. And then a few days later, driving home from our honeymoon, he got frustrated by traffic, and he threw a cold Big Mac in my face. Connor proceeded to beat me once or twice a week for the next 2.5 years of our marriage. That I was unique and alone in this situation. 1 in 3 violence or stalking at some point in her life. And the CDC reports that 15 million children are abused every year. 15 million. So actually, I was in very good company. Back to my question. Why did I stay? The answer is easy. I didn't know he was abusing me. Even though he held those loaded guns to my head, pushed me downstairs, threatened to kill our dog, pulled the key out of the car ignition as I drove down the highway, poured coffee grinds on my head as I dressed for a job interview. I never once thought of myself as a battered wife. Instead, I was a very strong woman in love with a deeply troubled man, and I was the only person on earth who could help Connor face his demons. The other question everybody asks is, why doesn't she just leave? Why didn't I walk out? I could have left any time. To me, this is the saddest and most painful question that people ask, because we victims know something you usually don't. It's incredibly dangerous to leave an abuser, because the final step in the domestic violence pattern is kill her. Over 70% of domestic violence murders happen after the victim has ended the relationship, after she's gotten out, because then the abuser has nothing left to lose. Other outcomes include long-term stalking, even after the abuser remarries, denial of financial resources, and manipulation of the family court system to terrify the victim and her children, who are regularly forced by family court judges to spend unsupervised time with the man who beat their mother. And still we ask, why doesn't she just leave? I was able to leave because of one final sadistic beating that broke through my denial. I realized that the man who I loved so much was going to kill me if I let him. So I broke the silence. I told everyone. the police, my neighbors, my friends and family, total strangers. And I'm here today because you all helped me. We tend to stereotype victims as grisly headlines, self-destructive women, damaged goods. The question, why does she stay, is code for some people for it's her fault for staying. As if victims intentionally choose to fall in love with men intent upon destroying us. But since publishing Crazy Love, I have heard hundreds of stories from men and women who also got out, who learned an invaluable life lesson from what happened, and who rebuilt lives, joyous, happy lives, as employees, wives, and mothers, lives completely free of violence. Like me, because it turns out that I'm actually a very typical domestic violence victim. And I remarried a kind and gentle man. We have those 3 kids. I have that black lab, and I have that minivan. What I will never have again, ever, is a loaded gun held to my head by someone who says that he loves me. Now, right now, maybe you're thinking, wow, this is fascinating. Or, wow, how stupid was she? But this whole time, I've actually been talking about you. I promise you, there are several people listening to me right now who are currently being abused, or who were abused as children, or who are abusers themselves. Abuse could be affecting your daughter, your sister, your best friend right now. I was able to end my own crazy love story by breaking the silence. I'm still breaking the silence today. It's my way of helping other victims. And it's my final request of you. Talk about what you heard here. Abuse thrives only in silence. You have the power to end domestic violence simply by shining a spotlight on it. We victims need everyone. We need every one of you to understand the secrets of domestic violence. Show abuse the light of day by talking about it with your children, your coworkers, your friends and family. Recast survivors as wonderful, lovable people with full futures. Recognize the early signs of violence and conscientiously intervene, de-escalate it, show victims a safe way out. Together, we can make our beds, our dinner tables, and our families the safe and peaceful oases they should be. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that, but I thought that video would be a good introduction. I've been kind of thinking a lot, like I was really interested in the Chris Watts case and wondering what Chris Watts who murdered his family and or the psychology behind it a little bit. I've always found it kind of interesting. Even what kind of brought this on for now, and I think it is important, especially with Gabby Petito, with the domestic, is help recognizing what domestic violence and what it can harm and do to people, and also there's ways to get out, and it's good to say something instead of staying in the domestic violence. Again, I was saying earlier, we all experience a form of dysfunction in our family, and I think a lot of this violence comes from families or drugs or whatever, and things like that. And so it's we don't know how to interact properly, and we use defensive or cope mechanisms as kids. Oops, sorry guys. To get the help we need. But anyways, I'd like to share another video. Let me get it set up here to share. I think this is a other good one. But that last video, I believe it showed some really good tips. And don't stay silent. If anything, don't be afraid to say something. Sorry, just one sec here. It's another video on YouTube, side commercial. I don't know if you can hear or not. Let me try to get this loaded here. I think I did that. Forgot to hear it down. One more time.
Every relationship I was ever in was abusive. I'm a recovering person, and I'm recovering from many, many things. One of them is domestic violence.
Jackie regularly comes here to San Bruno Jail to confront perpetrators of domestic violence face to face. She works with Resolve to Stop the Violence, the first program in the country to work with incarcerated men to confront their history of domestic abuse through restorative justice.
One of the things that I'm stricken by, absolute melting pot. And I can't think of transcending in cultures the domestic violence.
The first step usually was the verbal coercion, the threat. Very quickly after, it would like be a backhand or a slap. We call it chin checking, right? Just whap, whap. And it escalates from there.
Jimmy has been
A woman and then put a hand to her and gain that, like, see, I told you. Then the ass whoopings would escalate, right, to full out beatings. I never questioned that I wasn't right.
Rehabilitation programs for abusers are controversial, particularly when they're proposed as an alternative to incarceration. We sat down with Lee Goodmark, a lawyer and professor who writes extensively about the case for decriminalizing domestic violence.
How effective is restorative justice?
There are pockets of programs across the country that have tried to do this work, and some of them are doing amazing work around kind of the three central questions of restorative justice, right? What was the harm? What was the impact of that harm? And how do we hold this person accountable? What do they need to do to be able to make that harm whole?
We've heard so many horrific stories over the last several months. Some of these guys are monsters. Why advocate for them?
I don't see it as advocating for them. I see it as advocating for their partners. The criminal legal system is the primary policy vehicle that we've chosen to deal with domestic violence in the United States. And I just think that's not a realistic way to deal with this problem. It's not lowering rates of domestic violence. And in many cases, it actually exacerbates the factors that cause domestic violence in the first place.
How's that?
So for example, under and unemployed men are more likely to commit domestic violence. When you put someone through the criminal legal system, it's much more difficult to get a job. Similarly, trauma and violence are highly correlated with domestic violence. So we send you to a place that is violent, and then you go back into your community. And so I've come to believe that while we need the legal system as a backstop for those crimes that are so egregious that we need to have people kind of not among us, we're really failing to do any of the kind of preventative work we need to be doing to stop the violence before it starts.
I was subjected to just about every form of abuse by being in this marriage. There was always this level of emotional abuse where he would belittle me. He would remind me that I was nothing without him. And it might not seem so bad in one particular episode, but just imagine years and years and years and years of hearing that. What it did, the impact to him, my self-esteem and self-worth. I thought I couldn't do nothing on my own. Then there was the beat down. And this was a ritual. This was all consecutive. And after a while, I began to calculate it. I began to prepare myself for it.
When a survivor come in, they coming in to talk about what was done to them. And what we do, we process everything that happened to them, and we point out what the perpetrators done.
What I heard from Ms. Freeman was some verbal violence, which also connected with some emotional violence in her life.
Her first husband was saying, "You're nothing without me. You ain't got no money, or you don't pretty much exist." And she thought that, so it like she internalized it.
What is it like to sit in one of these chairs and hear a woman's story for the first time and put yourself into your partner's shoes?
I do remember the impact of it, and it was profound. Like I heard it, and it blew my mind because my victims weren't allowed to speak, especially about my violence.
Any of my victims personally, I never got to hear how they felt about anything that I've done to them. It's hard to be empathetic when outside in the streets, you know. But being in here with my head clear, it's like I'm starting to see that empathy is part of who I authentically am.
A 2005 study found that after 16 weeks in RSVP, recidivism in the first year of release dropped by more than 80%.
You know, we've talked about domestic violence as a women's issue for such a long time. But if 85% of the victims are women, and the vast majority of them are in heterosexual relationships, this is not a women's issue. It's a men's issue. It's just short-sighted not to look at the person who's causing the problem to deal with the problem. And I think we'll really start to see now what the potential for restorative justice is.
Again, that would be another useful video here. Let me try to upload one more. This is for male and female. Do you recognize signs of abuse, or these videos can help you anyway? I hope so, so it doesn't lead to Shanann Watts, Summer Wells, Gabby Petito, and many others. You know, I want you ladies and men to feel safe and to be happy, healthy people. You know, it can be scary. Again, a lot of this, it's my opinion, comes from dysfunctions in family, not knowing how to handle them correctly. And this next one should be able to help recognize the signs of it. So sorry, just one sec here. Dang commercials. But I feel like these videos are very good and to help. I mean, this is a recent news clip. I think it's very important. Let me share it here. But again, thanks for your patience. I don't do this too often or come live and do this, but I kind of felt like this is important. So let me go ahead and start. Oh, shoot. I always forget to hit the sound button. Let's see.
Well, the Gabby Petito case is just another example of violence against women, and we know exactly the specifics of her case are unknown, rather, but we do know that according to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States, and that's 20 people per minute. So joining us now to give us some guidance and perspective on how to identify any of these situations and what, if anything, we should do if we witness domestic violence is the director of Futures Without Violence, Kirsten Stewart. Kirsten, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with the basics. Relationships don't all look alike. What are some of the key factors that you look for?
Absolutely. If you're a family or friend or even just a concerned member of the community, you want to notice if somebody's changing their behavior, if they seem to be afraid of their partner, if somebody who is enthusiastic and exuberant is all of a sudden very quiet or shy. Certainly if you see, bruises or cuts that can't be explained, but that isn't always the case. Sometimes the scars are very much inside. So if you do see or are concerned about domestic violence, ideally you can find a quiet time to talk to the person you're concerned about and really just ask them. We encourage people not to blame somebody, not to shame, to just make themselves available to have a conversation.
And in the Gabby Petito case specifically, we see that police cam video where she seems upset and he has scratches on his face. How can you differentiate whether someone is truly in danger versus a couple that's having an argument or having some sort of breakdown?
That is a hard question. And if you're, far away and out in public, you can't always tell. We suggest you always take your cue from the person who seems potentially to be the victim. Again, are they afraid of that person? Are they trying to avoid that person? Are they, sometimes the person who takes all the blame isn't necessarily the person who's doing the harm. So we always recommend that you try not to escalate the violence. You certainly don't want to do that. Getting in a confrontation with someone is not recommended. Again, ideally, you would try to take that person to the side. If you can separate the two people, have a conversation, offer resources. There's a national domestic violence hotline number that you can share. But really, it's about asking the person what they want, what they need, and if they feel safe.
So let's say, for example, a 911 call is made. What resources do police departments have to help victims and survivors? And are there specific police departments that have procedures that are best practices in this situation?
There's been extensive training thanks to the Violence Against Women Act for law enforcement. And that doesn't mean everybody does it perfectly right all the time. But we do see many better practices happening. One of the ideal situations is that you actually bring a domestic violence advocate out with you on a call for domestic violence, so they can take the person aside, have a conversation. You want police to de-escalate the situation as much as possible, question the people separate and apart from one another. Often if there are children in the home, we also ask that police officers pay attention to the needs of the children. Again, not asking the children to necessarily choose, one parent over another. That's a deeply traumatic experience for a child, but to be sure that there's also someone that the child can talk to and that the child's trauma from that experience is also addressed.
So much to consider. And yet we all know that when victims try to leave these types of relationships, that's when it's most dangerous. Many choose to stay in these relationships. What steps can be taken to ensure that there is safety both in or out of that relationship?
Well, we strongly recommend someone who's concerned about domestic violence to talk to a domestic violence advocate. They can help that person develop what we call a safety plan. And that really depends on the unique circumstances of that person. You help them identify, do you have a place to go if you need to? Do you know where your car keys are? Do you have what we call a go bag? Important, like your birth certificate, important papers, any medicines. So if you do need to leave a home quickly, you can just grab it and go. There are many domestic violence agencies across the country. As I said, there's also the National Domestic Violence Hotline, who can be reached via email, via phone, via chat. It's a great place to start, even if you're not necessarily ready to leave, or if you're just a concerned friend or family member. They can walk you through the steps that are tied to this person's particular situation.
And if someone is seeking help, where do you counsel them to seek help first? What should the first step be?
So most people actually reach out to friend or family first. Some people will talk to their faith leaders, healthcare providers, we think are another wonderful resource. especially because you can have the privacy to talk to them about what may be going on, as well as what may be the health consequences of violence. Most people don't actually go to the police first. And again, we strongly recommend a call to a domestic violence advocate. Many domestic violence programs just have someone you can talk to. You don't have to be ready to leave the relationship or run to a shelter. It can just be a person to talk to start thinking about your situation and what might be your options.
Kirsten Stewart, so much valuable information. As the director of Futures Without Violence, thank you so much for your time.
All right, sorry, I'm gonna load one more video here. I hope this information helps. Another commercial. Oh wait, nope, that's it. Oops. Let me load this up for you, and then this will probably be the last video.
It was nice to see you again.
Yeah, great to catch up.
Yeah. Oh, can you share that banana bread recipe?
Oh, sure. It's actually my mom's banana bread recipe, but it's pretty foolproof and it's super easy.
Well, I appreciate it. I know your mom is a great baker, so I should be good.
The trick is to grease the pan really well and use overripe bananas. That's my mom's tip.
Okay, good to know. I can't wait to try it. So thanks again for the recipe.